Hi and Ben, welcome to my book corner. Today we have another book review for you. This is for Human Scars on Planet Skin. This was an arc that I got via Book Sirens, and this releases on September the 1st of this year, 2025. And this was written by Effie Joe Stock and Nathaniel Luscombe. This is a sci-fi horror novel. The ebook version that I read came in at 234 pages. As always, we shall talk a little bit about the story, the characters, the world building, and the presentation before my final thoughts at the end of the video. So let's just dive straight in. So this is set in the future on an alien world. Specifically, that world is called Turr. And Turr is... sentient is probably not quite the right word, but is a planet that in itself is aware of all the organisms that are connected to it, be they plant, animal, or other. And one day humanity arrives and does what humanity often does when it goes out and colonizes other areas, starts stripping it of its bare resources, causing immense pain to the planet, destroying the ecosystems, having effects on the local population, some of which humans take captive to study. The majority of this book, however, happens after the withdrawal of humanity, after Turr has gathered all its strength to strike back and drive the humans away. And as the humans flee back into hyperspace, taking as many people with them as they can as the planet literally rises up, there is an environmental fallout from their hyperdrives that causes vast swathes of further devastation to the planet. So you have themes of colonization, environmentalism, and the breaking of the balance of life within an ecosystem going on here. And then the focus there is on two main characters, which we'll get onto in a moment, dealing with potentially how the world has changed and how their new normal is going to come about, and struggling to deal with that. This is more of a character piece rather than a plot. It does take place over a period of a number of years, through a period of flashbacks and retrospectives as well. And generally speaking, this is a very, very powerful little novel talking about the dangers of breaking that ecosystem balance and the potential fallout of that. And in that regard, this actually does work really, really strongly. Onto the characters then. This is told from 3 points of view. The first and last chapter are from the point of view of the planet itself, from Turr, and then you have alternate chapters between 2 other characters called Invidia and Clyra. So, touching on Turr first of all, you do get a sense of this massive, sprawling organism that doesn't know what's happening. I quite often get reminded a little bit here of like the Ents in Lord of the Rings, where they are quite slow to react to the world around them because they're just so vast and so old that time doesn't have the same meaning to them. Things that happen over a massive period of time they will more likely to notice, but these tiny little minuscule moments they generally won't. So you have this kind of slow realization by our standards, but not the world's on the galactic scale, of these things that are happening and how Turr feels this pain and eventually reacts and lashes out. And then this hits back into the very end section where so long after the devastation and Turr has kind of reclaimed itself for itself, how the world has changed, but it's new and it's different, and that's not necessarily bad. It's just different that's been caused by a bad thing, and there's a sense of reflection there with Turr as a character. Now, our other 2 characters are Invidia and Clyra, and they both come from very different points of view. In Invidia's case, they are a mushroom person, a fungal person, specifically around... what's the best way to describe this? Their kind of job is to do with hallucinations a little bit and altering like the worldviews. And when everything happens, they are left incredibly injured. Their closest friend sort of rots away and dies, and they go into this spiral of grief, of denial. Their friend can't possibly be dead. And this person who has always felt so close to Turr feels that connection break and loses faith. And this is a case of somebody having a complete loss of faith and having to try and relearn it and rediscover it and face their own grief, no matter how painful it is, as they're living kind of within their own hallucination for big periods of this. Clyra, on the other hand, is a fungaloid who is taken by humanity and experimented on. And they come from a very different point of view, where they kind of have lost their faith, and then at the start they have something that piques it. And you have these alternate ways of these two characters coming together. Now, the other side of this is Invidia is on their own, all their friends have passed away, whereas Clyra is with a group of other people who are kind of rediscovering their abilities, you know, their ability to reap death and having to kind of face what they've always been, but they've lost that connection. And whereas in Invidia's case, it's the loss of connection. In Clyra's case, it's the sudden gaining, having to deal with that. And then seeing the world and the destruction, the devastation that humanity has wrought on this world gives them both very, very different perspectives from where they start from and where they're going to end up with by the end. As you do have a harmony that is achieved through this as they deal with the horrors and the grief of losing their home in many regards, the sheer level of destruction. And that works really well. There are a number of other smaller characters that we meet through these two. They add a level of emotional weight. They also, especially in Clyra's case, offer dissenting views, as just like Clyra, they've been through this imprisonment and they have suffered with sort of the same sort of hardships, and some of them have lost that faith and never going to gain it again. They've suffered various injuries. Some of them just don't wish to continue. Some of them are not going to make it to the end, and they kind of realise this. And that gives this a really strong emotional core as well, driven by those character interactions, which works really, really well. There is something slightly off about all these characters, which makes sense. They are not human. They don't approach things necessarily in the same way that humanity would do. So that makes it work really well as well. World building then, and this is a weird one in that it doesn't really hit the specifics like a lot of other sci-fi novels do, but it doesn't have to, because what you're going here is the vibe of the world, the vibe of that interconnectivity, the fact that everything relies on everything else, the sense of balance, and it does an amazing job at driving that home. From Turr's point of view, with the sudden shock with this ecological damage and this colonization of it, this very much almost like a virus in many regards, you could see it as humanity as the virus of this piece, attacking the host, makes actually complete sense. And then the ripple effects that that has are really, really well shown, both through the flashbacks to when things initially happen, the short-term effects, the longer-term effects, and the fallout in the end when humanity leaves. That works really well, and you get this real sense of community isn't quite the right word, but things just work here. Everything works in tandem. This very much does feel like a world that has grown and evolved and has found its own natural rhythm without the real sort of need to consume everything around it. Everything is in balance, and it manages to hit that explanation really well. And that works especially well when you then juxtapose it against where humanity landed, where humanity built, and how those places feel almost like blemishes to be reclaimed because they just don't work, how things are being sucked out of the planet and just destroyed by usage, and therefore how that breaks the ecology of the world. And that is fascinating as well. So overall, this does feel like a very ancient world, but somehow in a weird way derived of history, because it doesn't really need it, because it is a gentle increase in evolution as time has gone on, rather than like human history is with these sudden jumps in technical prowess. And it does an amazing job at capturing the vibe that this story kind of is going for in terms of how important balance actually is to the ecology of life in general, and how easy it is to upset that balance by not thinking ahead. Presentation then, I quite like the cover. You have this sort of focus on the fungus of the world. You have these sort of streaks coming out of the sky representing the destruction of humanity, and the characters that we follow around are kind of fungaloid characters anyway, so that makes sense. You get the sense of this lush planet looking out into space that's understood by technology and an impending disaster, and the little blemishes on the actual title doing an excellent job of giving the idea of sort of this almost diseased skin of the planet. So really like that, first of all. That it is clear that this is written by two different writers, and this is an occasion where I think that works exceptionally well, because as I understand it, I'm not sure which way around it is, one author wrote Clyra, the other wrote Invidia. And that works exceptionally well to give these two not quite dissenting voices. In the end, they end up kind of at the same place in many regards, but it makes them feel more unique in a way that you don't always get with a single author writing the point of view, because these are two incredibly different characters, diametrically opposed in their worldviews because of their experiences in many ways. And that then comes through with the descriptions of the world, because both of these descriptions are tainted by that specific character's existence, kind of in isolation of the other for the majority of the story. So that works exceptionally well as well. I will say Invidia is a much harder character of the two to read for me personally, because of the trauma and the system shock that they go through. And you do have these moments in there where it's a bit difficult to tell, intentionally so I would add, where reality ends and the hallucination begins. And it does make it a little bit of harder read, in that you've kind of got to take more attention to what you're reading to pick up those clues. It's a lot harder to passively find them. Whereas Invidia is perhaps the more straightforward of the characters in many regards. The more human in some ways, partially because they've been imprisoned by humans, which can also explain that. So that works really well. And the other thing that works well here as well is the flashbacks, because they're not necessarily flashing back to the same points in a linear sense all the time, and it could only be a couple of days before humanity arrived, or 5 years after, or now. But it shows the different stages of the event in many regards, the effects that humanity had at different points, from before their arrival, what the world was like, establishing that, to just after and how everything reacted, to a few years after and how the world is kind of almost feels like it's dealing with an infection at this point, to the expulsion of humanity back into space and the immediate fallout with that, the real visceral feel of you've just dropped hyperspace fuel all over the planet while you've left. That's not going to do well for plant life. And it really does a great job of showing before, during, and after in these little snippets without having to go into too much detail, and then focusing on the present of the actual massive fallout from this before Turr's sort of last chapter, as balance is kind of restored, but it's a new balance, and how the big thing with life and with evolution is that sometimes things don't heal. You know, grief doesn't heal all the time, and that's something that people kind of sometimes get wrong. And it's something that was spoken about in Liminal Monsters by Luke Tarzian as well, that some scars just don't heal, so you have to find a new way. And I really do like that, and that works really well as like a final message for this one. So overall, I did really like this. I did find it a tough read at times, but that's fine. With the subject matter of this, I'd be disappointed if I didn't. Final thoughts then, and whilst I really do appreciate this book, I think it's really, really good, I will have a hard time recommending this to a lot of people, because the sheer nature of this is this is a very dark book that dives more into the psychological effects of the event than anything else. And for me, I like stuff like that, but a lot of people read books for escapism, and this is not going to give people that level of escapism. There's plenty of stuff going on in the world right now, and historically as well, that has themes linked to stuff that happens in this book. So from that point of view, it makes it a bit of a harder kind of recommendation for me. On saying that, it does handle all its themes really, really well, in my opinion. It is very, very dark, at times overwhelmingly so, especially in Invidia's point of view, and it does touch on some horrific things. But also the final messaging of this, the idea of, sometimes you can't fix something entirely, and you need to find that new normal, and you have to keep working at that new normal, because some things never go away and they'll occasionally rear their ugly head. It's a really powerful message that we kind of forget to deliver sometimes. It's interestingly enough something that Liminal Monsters touched on as well, which I really, really enjoyed, by Luke Tarzian. Review up there if you want to check that out. So in that regard, it works really, really well. But this is not going to be a book for everyone. It's certainly not a book for escapism. But if you're after a book that deals with some really, really dark themes around environmentalism, pollution, colonization, and consumption in particular, as well as some horror aspects, especially around like body horror and some gruesomeness, then I think you will really enjoy this one. So that is my thoughts on Human Scars on Planet Skin. Have you read anything like this? Does this sound like it's interesting to you? Let me know down in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you all very soon.